Hi, class. This is day 12 of the Civil Rights Unit. This should be Tuesday, April 28th. Today, we have some discussions about women's rights. We're also going to have an additional video, Ask a Girl. That should be interesting. And just a few reminders I want to give you real quick. Honors students, remember your essay topics. You must have those selected by Friday, or I select for you. I think I'm down to 5 students. The other 22 have picked them. For all my other students, documents of the week will start next week. They will start May 4th. So be ready for that and keep checking this feed, this stream. You'll see something new released every single day. So let's start off with our objectives for the day. We're going to talk about women's rights and areas they were discriminated in. And of course, I want you to know what the letters stand for the organization that stood for civil rights. A lot of organizations in this double unit. So, we have civil rights organizations like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and then you're going to see there's a group like that for women. Again, that's one of those things that these other groups steal. They're like, oh, we need an organization, at least one, advocating for certain rights, organizing the movement. And so you're going to have to know what those letters stand for and what group fought for women's rights. But before we do that, let's review a little bit the formative that you did the other day. I'm not going to review the worksheet yet because actually the worksheet is just sort of a chart anyway. And I want to give just a little bit more time for some people to finish that up. But let's go over the formative. So, what would the case have been if I tried to force you to pray at the start of class? Well, anytime you hear school prayer, remember angel, Engel, angel, close enough. That's how I remember this particular case, Engel versus Vital. It says you cannot support an organized religion. This case would probably be cited if I ask for a lawyer and the police tell me I can't possibly afford a lawyer on a teacher's salary. Well, that one's the one that's probably the most commonly known case before I taught that section, Miranda versus Arizona. This case would be cited if Sandusky, which probably has, I believe last I'd heard 21, 22,000 residents, was told they had one representative in the Ohio House, and Berlin Heights, which has like 600 residents, also had one representative in the Ohio House. So that would be 21,000 for one rep and 600 for another. That doesn't seem terribly fair. That one would be Baker versus Carr. You remember voting districts, it's easy to remember if you think about driving your car around that particular district. Why did a medical student named Bakke sue the University of California, and who won the case? He sued because he felt he was a victim of discrimination, what he called reverse discrimination. And he won that case, although there were some caveats and it was not just clear cut, but he did, in fact, win that case. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's talk a little bit about women's rights, if the page will turn. Women's protests. So this is our second section. So the first section of Unit 11 was court cases. All of Section 2 will be about women's rights. And women's rights have been fought for in this country as long as we've had a country. Um, I talked to you a little bit about Dolly Madison, for example, Abigail Adams, and others at the beginning of the year, asking, "Hey, why you're writing this Declaration? Why you're writing this Constitution?" Abigail Adams famously saying, "Remember the ladies," and they didn't. And I don't want to give you the idea that that ever stopped. It's like the civil rights movement. It never. It's not like nothing happened for 100 years, but in the 50s and 60s is when you start to see such tremendous progress. In the 60s, for the women's rights movement, you can attribute this one to the civil rights movement awakening citizens to their ability to fight for their rights, and two, the release of a novel called The Feminine Mystique. Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique seemed to have the effect of waking many women up to the reality that they had expectations placed upon them that were not fair. This is just different covers over the years. I wish I had you in class because I actually have an original uh, release of this book, this particular copy right here. I picked it up for $1 at a garage sale. I'm sure they didn't know that it's a first release, first edition, and it's probably worth $2. I don't know. It should be worth a lot more. It's important, but the Feminine Mystique came out and basically said women are expected to be housewives and mothers. And Betty Friedan says, if that is what you would like, there is nothing wrong with that. And you should be allowed to do that, of course. But if you would rather do X, Y, or Z, maybe be a businesswoman or something like that. You should be allowed to do that too, either in addition or instead of. It's your choice. The whole idea is that it should be your choice as to what type of life you would like to lead, not the expectations of society. And this really rang true with a lot of women in this era. And it also brought a lot of attention to various ways women were being discriminated against. So I'm going to have this little segment. It's going to run 10 or 15 minutes where I interview Mrs. P about some things that she's experienced uh, in terms of sexism. Minor, albeit, but still real, legitimate sexism. Um, and in her case, I'm going to ask her about buying cars. I know that's one that's gotten under her skin before. There is a lot of just sort of almost accepted subtle sexism always going on in society. And in the 50s and 60s, it was less subtle and more egregious, but it's still out there. So let's talk about economic issues. Women average 59% of the salary, or 59 cents on every dollar, for the same work in the same industry, producing the same amount. So I'm hiring you to make these little, I don't know, bind history books. And I've got a female worker who does 100 a day, and I got a male worker who does 100 a day. They both have the same amount of experience. That woman, on average, in the 60s, would have made 59 cents to every male dollar, even though they were producing the same amount. Absolutely insane. Now you might say to yourself, "There's no way it's like that today." That is correct. It's not the same way today. It's 85 cents for every dollar, which is better, but insane that it's still 15% less for the same work. So economic issues were absolutely out there. There were only 5% of all managers in the 1960s. That has certainly increased. I don't have any modern numbers on that at the moment, but women were just not perceived at the time to be in a position of leadership. I even look at something, you know, much closer to home. All of my head principals, holding that position that Mr. Talbot has, all of them have been men. Uh, and I believe, yes, in the history of the high school, which dates back to the 1800s, it's always been men. Now, the first female assistant principal that we ever had was in the 90s. I was there. That's bizarre to me that our first female assistant principal wasn't hired until the 90s. Now, I've had a, a couple of female assistant principals since then, and there's certainly many very uh, solid and gifted administrators who are women. But boy, it just seems so weird that it took so long to recognize half the population. It would just make sense would hold half of these positions. Um, Political rights. Oh, by the way, I'm not going to put this one on the test, but only 37% of the college population at the time was female. Actually, today that's gone the other way. Far more women are in college today than men, which, ideally, I guess you just like to see things be proportionate to the population. And technically speaking, by the way, women make up 51% of the population. You have equal chance of being born a male or female, but women live a little bit longer. Uh, Women would tell you that's because men make dumb choices, and there's some statistical evidence to support that riskier behavior. Men would say we don't live as long because we often live with women. Okay, so yeah, I get away with that because no one was here to stop me. All right, political rights. Women at the time only held 5% of all legislative seats in the United States. In other words, our Congress people, our senators, our members of the House, only 5% were women. Again, you'd think it would be roughly 50%. Very few women were in local, state, or national executive positions. There just weren't that many female mayors. There are more today than there used to be, but still not tons. There are not that many female governors. Again, more today than there used to be. And we have not yet had a female president. Now, we now have a major candidate for the election 2020, Joe Biden, saying that he will nominate a female for vice president. If he won, then that would be the first female vice president. First female vice president to run for office was 1984, Geraldine Ferraro. And of course, Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2016. But we're still, hundreds of years of histories, 45 presidents, and we still haven't gotten to that female president yet. Another big issue in the women's rights movement was the FDA approving the birth control pill. Now, this might sound a little out of bounds, and I'm certainly not going to get into it too much, but it is something that is commonly covered in the women's rights movement because of one simple thing. Although birth control does nothing to stop any sort of sexually transmitted diseases or anything like that, it is a big leap forward in controlling unwanted pregnancies. And so you have now women feeling empowered to say, I only want to have this many kids or no kids or whatever it is. And what you see is with this, you see women feeling liberated to feel like they don't necessarily have to have the 8, 10, 12 kids that were so common in the baby boom. I don't think it's any coincidence that the baby boom comes to an end by 1964, so soon after the approval of the birth control pill. And if you listen, there are women who have careers with 8 kids, but obviously it is more challenging. And so when you have families today, the average is 1.9 children. It's nothing's easy, but it becomes more manageable to have a career and a family with 2 kids as opposed to 12. Although, again, both can be done and neither are easy. Now, abortion, I'm going to set to the side for the moment, but I will say that Roe versus Wade decision was also fought for by many women in the women's rights movement. But that really caused a major split, a rift in the women's rights movement, because abortion is a very controversial topic. And the country is very split by that issue. And so it shouldn't surprise you that women are very split by that issue. So many women felt the women's rights movement betrayed them when they fought for the right to have an abortion, because some women in the women's rights movement felt abortion was key to women's rights. Others thought that's an entirely separate thing. An organization that helped push all of these issues forward, including the Roe versus Wade case, was NOW. NOW stands for the National Organization of Women. And this is one of those organizations you're going to have to know. We're going to have a group for Hispanic Americans, for Native Americans, for hippies. We've already covered several groups for African Americans. You have to know these organizations' names, what the letters stand for, too. NOW, the National Organization of Women, then and now fights for civil rights for women. Now, civil rights, according that varies. How does that display itself? Some women would say, fighting to make that economic equality, political equality, having more female governors, a female president, having equal pay, fighting for maternity leave, childcare, and the Equal Rights Amendment, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Some issues were more important to individual members than others, but as an organization, they were fighting for all of these. Now still exist. And if we look here at their banner, I'm just on their website. I'm not advocating or disavowing anything they're standing for. I'm just going to let you see sort of what they scroll through. They talk about the Coronavirus Care Fund. I'm pretty sure you're going to see something along the lines of abortion rights. Okay, I didn't expect that one. Immigrants, sure. Ending prostitution. I mean, these are issues that right now is looking at attacking because they feel that these are issues that directly affect their constituency, women. And there you go. I think we've pretty much scrolled through their banner, and you could click on any one of these, and they would tell you, oh, the Equal Rights Amendment. That kind of ties in nicely to what we're teaching next. They will tell you that these issues, there's been progress made, but not enough. So it is absolutely still a group out there fighting for women's rights. And they were helped by dynamic leaders, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, and then magazines like Ms. Magazine. Ms. Magazine is also still out there. Little point of trivia, the very first copy of Ms. Magazine had Wonder Woman on the cover. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Celebrating the idea of, strong, powerful woman. Now, today, well, let me go to a more modern issue. Oh, there's the first cover versus a cover in 2009. You don't have to be a woman to be a feminist. You have to be somebody who's in favor of women's rights. And Barack Obama was a individual who said, "Hey, I'm proud to believe in this and to want more equality for women." Ms. Magazine is still around. And Ms. Magazine, let's see what they're dealing with here. Talking about immigration, women's and civil rights groups, restricting abortion, fighting against restricting abortion, and ERA again. So that's quite convenient because we're talking about ERA next. So very similar to Now. Ms. Magazine is not run by Now, but you could certainly see where they have common objectives and common beliefs. Okay, so let's get into, well, I did touch on this already. Not everybody agreed with Now, particularly when it came to reproductive rights. All right, the big fight. The big fight that is sort of unfortunately a glaring uh, failure so far in the Women's Rights Amendment was an Equal Rights Amendment. An amendment to the Constitution to constitutionally guarantee that women had equal rights to men. This was introduced, it's been introduced, I believe, every year for 50 years or something crazy like that. It might be every year, period. Uh, First introduced in 1923. In the 70s, it actually looked like it was going to pass. In the 70s, it passed the House 350 to 15. In 72, it passed the Senate 84 to 8. You don't have to know these years or these numbers. And then once it passes the House and the Senate, any amendment then has to pass 3/4 of the states. So in today's 50 state United States, that means you've got to pass 38 states. So 38 states. By 1973, right after it was passed by Congress, it had already passed 30. And it just seemed like they couldn't get those last few states. And even with a 3-year extension, only 35 states had approved that amendment. So the Equal Rights Amendment has not yet passed. Now, as you saw on that Ms. Magazine page, and it might have been on the Now page, there's still a fight to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. But why wouldn't it pass? Well, in the 70s, part of it was some women's groups fighting for traditional family values who felt that if women got equal rights, they would have an equal opportunity to be drafted. And remember, this was during the Vietnam War. I'm not saying that's the only factor, but it was a big factor. Uh, Again, this debate is still out there. Women have many federal laws that protect them to not be discriminated against, but there's something about putting it in the Constitution that certainly makes it feel much more permanent, much more real. And so far, we haven't seen that happen. The states that did not approve, you can read down here, I think largely, not entirely, you can see that they're southern states, which politically are more conservative than many other states. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are all your notes for women's rights. I believe I'll save the formative for tomorrow, and then I'll only have one additional video, and that's the Ask a Girl, where I'm going to interview Mrs. Penrose about some sexism that she may have experienced, and I'll try to catch her on a few questions and see if she thinks that there's some reverse discrimination when it comes to men, although really I'm much more interested in the idea of how we perceive social sort of expectations based on whether you're a guy or girl. And maybe, maybe they're all dangerous, even if we perceive some of them to be beneficial. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe out there, and I will see you for class. Well, you'll hear me for class tomorrow. See you Wednesday.